The clock on the kitchen wall ticked louder than usual, each second scratching at my nerves. The casserole sat in the center of the table, untouched, its surface glazed over from cooling too long. I had lit 2 candles hours ago, but now only melted wax clung stubbornly to their bases, the flames long gone. I sat with my arms crossed, staring at the empty chair across from me. His chair. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, watching, waiting, pressing against me until I could hardly breathe. My husband was late again. No call, no text, nothing. I tried to tell myself it was traffic, or maybe work had kept him, later than expected. But that excuse had worn thin weeks ago. A familiar whisper inside me, the one I'd been trying to drown out for months, asked the question I didn't want to face. What if he's not coming home at all? I rubbed the edge of my wedding band, twisting it around my finger until the skin turned red. Sometimes I wondered if he still noticed I wore it. Lately, his eyes barely lingered on me. Conversations had become exchanges of necessity, bills, schedules, reminders, never love, never warmth. The refrigerator hummed softly, breaking the stillness for a moment before the quiet swallowed it again. My stomach growled, but the thought of eating without him made me sick. I remembered the first year of our marriage when he would burst through the door grinning, apologizing for being late. Flowers in one hand, his briefcase in the other. Back then, I believed love could carry us through anything. Now, I wasn't so sure. I stood and carried my plate to the sink, scraping food into the trash with a sharp clatter that echoed through the kitchen. The noise startled me. It sounded too loud, too final. My hands trembled as I rinsed the plate, the water running cold against my skin. When I shut off the tap, I froze. The house felt heavier, as though someone else was there, standing just behind me. Slowly, I turned, but the kitchen was empty, just shadows stretching long across the tiled floor. My chest tightened and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I told myself I was being foolish. The house was always like this when he didn't come home, too still, too sharp, like it was holding its breath. I walked back to the table and picked up my phone. The screen glared at me, empty of messages. I typed his name, my thumb hovering over the call button, but I didn't press it. I hated the idea of sounding desperate, of begging for scraps of his time. Instead, I set the phone down, face first, and closed my eyes. The walls creaked softly, as if shifting under some invisible weight. Something wasn't right. And though I didn't know it yet, tonight would be the last night my husband ever came home. The night stretched on, each hour clawing at my nerves. Midnight came and went, and still there was no sign of him. I sat curled on the couch, clutching a blanket to my chest as though it could steady my racing heart. The house felt colder, emptier, as though it already knew something I didn't. Finally, I gave in. I picked up my phone and dialed his number, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then the sound shifted, muffled but near, far too near. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't coming from the other end. It was coming from outside. I stumbled to the door, barefoot on the hardwood, the phone pressed tight against my ear. The ringtone echoed faintly through the night air. My stomach turned cold. I followed the sound, heart thundering with every step. Out past the porch, down the narrow gravel drive. The summer wind carried the faint rustle of leaves, but underneath it I heard the ring. Persistent, mechanical, guiding me like a cruel beacon. At the edge of the woods, I found his car, parked crooked, driver's door ajar. My phone still buzzed. In my palm, calling his number, but the ringtone was inside the vehicle. I leaned in and there it was, his phone, abandoned on the passenger seat, screen flashing with my call. I stared at it, my pulse roaring in my ears. He never left his phone. Not once in all the years I'd known him. My hand brushed against the cool metal of the car door, and a wave of nausea hit me. The keys weren't in the ignition. His wallet wasn't on the dash. The seatbelt hung slack, swinging gently as though Someone had just slipped free of it. I stepped back, wrapping my arms around myself as fear pressed down on me. Questions churned, sharp and relentless. Had he gone into the woods? Was he meeting someone? Or had someone taken him? For a moment, anger cut through the fear. What if this was all about her, the woman whose name I'd glimpsed once on his phone, erased before I could confront him? Was he with her now, while I stood here in the dark, trembling like a fool? But the anger dissolved as quickly as it came, leaving only dread. Because no affair, no betrayal. Explained the abandoned phone, the open car, the silence of the trees. The woods loomed black and endless before me, the air thick with something unseen. I didn't step forward. I couldn't. Instead, I turned back, toward the house, clutching my own phone like a weapon. It was time to call the police. By the time the flashing blue lights washed over the front of my house, my nerves were shredded thin. I'd paced the floor until the boards groaned under me, rehearsing explanations in my head. None of them sounded convincing. 2 officers stepped out first, their uniforms catching the glare of the headlights. Behind them came a man in plain clothes, his coat heavy, his eyes sharper than the others. A detective. He moved with quiet authority, like he already suspected something. "Mrs. Carver?" he asked. His voice was calm, too calm. "Yes," I whispered, hugging my arms around myself. "We got your call. You said you found your husband's car by the woods." I nodded quickly. "Yes." The door was open. His phone was inside. But he wasn't there. The detective studied me, expression unreadable. "And when exactly did you last see him?" I hesitated. Midnight had blurred into one long ache, but the truth was I hadn't seen him since morning. He'd kissed my cheek distractedly. Before work, mumbled something about being late. After that, nothing. "This morning," I said softly. The pause that followed was suffocating. One of the uniformed officers jotted notes in a small pad, glancing at me as though my words confirmed something ugly. "And you waited until after midnight to call us?" The detective pressed. Shame burned hot in my chest. I thought he was working late. He does that. I didn't want to overreact. His gaze flicked to my hands, clenched so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. Then back, to my face. "You're certain there wasn't an argument, nothing unusual today?" I swallowed. How could I tell them about the silence between us? The distance that had grown like a wall no one dared climb. If I admitted too much, it would sound like motive. If I said too little, it would sound like I was hiding something. "No," I forced out. "Nothing unusual." The detective didn't write it down. He only stared, long enough for me to feel the lie hanging between us. "His car will be towed and processed," he said finally. "We'll search the woods. In the meantime, stay available. We'll have more questions." When they left, the house felt even emptier than before. Their footsteps lingered in my ears, their eyes burned into my memory. I sank into a chair, trembling. I had called for help, but somehow, I had become the one under suspicion. And deep down, I feared they were right to doubt me. The morning after the police visit, I barely slept. My mind replayed the detective's questions, twisting them into accusations. Every pause, every lingering stare made me feel as if I were already guilty of something I hadn't done. I made coffee. I couldn't drink and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone they had left behind. His phone. They hadn't taken it for evidence. Not yet. It lay there like a ticking bomb, glowing faintly when I brushed my hand across the screen. I told myself not to look. I told myself it would only hurt. But pain was already eating me alive, so what difference did it make? His messages opened with a swipe, casual, like opening a wound. Most were ordinary. Reminders about work, notes from colleagues. Then I saw her name. Just 3 letters, saved without a last name, as though he'd tried to keep it hidden but not too well. The last message was short. "Same place tonight? Don't be late this time." I read it over and over until the words blurred. My heart thundered in my chest, rage bubbling hot under my skin. While I had been sitting here waiting with dinner on the table, he had been meeting her. Another woman. My first thought was denial. Maybe it was work, maybe it was innocent. But the phrasing, the secrecy, the way his tone softened in those brief texts told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't business. This was betrayal. I shoved the phone away, but the knowledge clung to me like smoke. Grief washed in next, colder than the rage. How long had I been living in a marriage that was already dead? How long had I been blind? There you were. Kettle whistled on the stove, but I didn't move to stop it. I sat frozen, my hand pressed hard against my mouth to keep from screaming. Betrayal was worse than fear. Fear left me trembling, but betrayal burned, tearing me apart from the inside. And yet as much as I hated him in that moment, a darker thought settled in. If he was with her, then where was he now? By the third day, I had stopped pretending. He wasn't just late. He wasn't at work. He wasn't with her. He was gone. The detective's call came just after dawn, his voice clipped and professional. We've found something. You need to come down to the river. The drive blurred past me, trees bending against the pale morning sky. My hands clutched the wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened, but I couldn't feel them. All I could hear was the echo of her text. Don't be late. This time. A message meant for a man who would never read it again. When I arrived, the riverbank swarmed with uniforms. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind, a fragile boundary between ordinary life and nightmare. I forced my way forward, my breath catching, in the damp air. And then I saw him. He lay half submerged in the water, tangled in reeds, his shirt clinging to his body like a shroud. His skin was pale, lips blue, eyes closed as though in a restless sleep. One shoe was missing, the other caught. Against a rock downstream, the current lapped gently around him, rocking his body with a cruel tenderness. My knees buckled. The world tilted, the sound of rushing water folding over me until everything went silent. I felt myself falling, my palms scraping against the wet ground, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. That was my husband. That was the man I had shared a life with, the man who had kissed me good morning just days ago. And yet staring at him, I felt something else too. A cold, jagged shard of anger. He had left me with silence, with lies, with her. And now he had left me with this. Hands caught me under the arms, steadying me. The detective's voice cut through the fog. Mrs. Carver, you need to step back. Shook my head, choking out words that sounded weak even to me. No, he wouldn't just. But my protest trailed off. Because he had. Whether by accident, by violence, or by his own choices, he had ended here. I pressed my hands to my face, but the tears wouldn't come. The officers exchanged glances, their pity edged with suspicion. One whispered something to the detective, and though I couldn't hear, I understood. My grief wasn't enough, not loud enough, not broken enough. To them, I wasn't just a wife in mourning, I was a question mark, a possible answer. The detective's eyes lingered on me as the body was lifted from the water, shrouded in white. He didn't look at my husband. He looked at me. And in that moment I realized I wasn't just losing him. I was losing myself too. The image of his body in the river clung to me like damp clothes I couldn't peel away. Even after they zipped him into the white bag, even after the detectives ushered me home, I couldn't escape it. But death had a way of dragging memories to the surface. Memories I had tried to bury. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, and the past replayed itself in fragments. Don't be so dramatic, he used to say whenever I cried. His tone wasn't cruel, just dismissive, as though my feelings were inconveniences he had no time to handle. I remembered the way he'd take my phone from my hand when I questioned him about late nights, scrolling through my texts instead of showing me his. You're paranoid, he'd insist, planting just enough doubt in me that I wondered if I was the problem. There were nights he didn't come home until dawn. Once when I pressed him, he laughed. Do you really think anyone, else would want me. You should be grateful. His words had cut deeper than any knife, yet I'd swallowed them. Convinced love meant forgiveness. The cracks in our marriage weren't sudden. They spread slowly, like hairline fractures in glass. From the outside, everything looked intact. Inside, I was breaking. I thought of the first time I found a receipt tucked in his jacket pocket, a dinner for two at a restaurant I'd never been to. When I asked, he smirked. "You're imagining things again." And I believed him. I let him twist reality until I doubted my own eyes. That was his gift, making me question myself until truth and lie blurred together. Now, with him gone, those memories no longer felt like paranoia. They felt like evidence. The detective had seen the hesitation in my voice, the uncertainty in my answers. What if they already knew about the texts, about the nights he vanished, about the arguments I never told anyone? The truth was simple. We had loved each other once, but in the end, love had rotted into something sharp and cruel. I closed my eyes, the weight of years pressing down on me. Maybe it was inevitable that one of us would break. Maybe it was inevitable that our marriage would end, not with a divorce, but with a body in the river. And yet, as heavy as those memories were, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had been pulling the strings. Someone who knew him the way I did. I thought I had reached the limit of humiliation until they brought her in. The detective didn't hide it. He sat me down in the stale air of the precinct, his voice flat as he explained they'd spoken to a woman who had been in contact with my husband. The words stung like acid, but I forced myself to sit still, hands knotted in my lap. When she walked in, I nearly laughed at the audacity of it. Young, polished, a careful softness painted on her face, as though she'd practiced in the mirror. She didn't look like temptation. She looked like calculation. "I cared for him," she began, voice trembling just enough to sound believable. "He told me things weren't working in his marriage. He was planning to leave." My breath caught, though I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. She kept her eyes on the detective, not on me, as if I were nothing more than an obstacle in the story she'd rehearsed. She spoke of secret dinners, long drives, stolen hours in between his meetings. Every detail she shared was polished, too clean, as though scrubbed of imperfection. But it was her tone that unsettled me most. Controlled, precise, like someone testifying to a script. The detective nodded, jotting notes, occasionally glancing at me as though comparing her poise to my unraveling. I wanted to scream, to claw at the mask she wore, but instead I sat rigid, fury burning holes in my throat. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. "Where was he the night he died?" Her pause was slight, barely there, but I saw it. She shifted in her chair, eyes flickering before she answered. "He never showed up. Too smooth. Too fast. Something in me tightened. She wasn't telling the whole truth. She knew more. Maybe she had been with him that night. Maybe she had been the last one to see him alive. The detective didn't press further. But I did, silently. I studied her, memorized the tremor in her hand, the flicker in her gaze. Because now I wasn't just a grieving wife. I was a woman who had found her rival. And I was certain this rival was lying. The days after her confession blurred into a haze of suspicion. I thought the police would finally look at her, see through the cracks in her polished story. Instead, their eyes kept circling back to me. It began with the photographs. The detective slid them across the table, dark bruises blooming along my forearms. I had forgotten about them, half convinced they were from clumsy bumps against counters or doors. But under fluorescent light, they looked like proof of a fight. "Care to explain these?" he asked. I swallowed, throat dry. I bruise easily. His silence was heavier than accusation. Then came the kitchen. They told me they had tested the floor near the sink, found faint traces of blood hidden in the grout. "Old, but not invisible," protested, desperate. "I cut myself cooking weeks ago." He laughed at me for crying over it. "Ask anyone. I'm clumsy." But even as I spoke, the words rang hollow. They didn't sound like explanations. They sounded like excuses. At night, I replayed everything in my head, searching for clarity. Instead, memories tangled into nightmares. His voice rising, my own shouting back, the sharp crash of a glass hitting the wall. How many arguments had we buried beneath silence? How many wounds had we both ignored? The more I tried to piece it together, the more the detectives twisted it. They said I had delayed calling them. They said my grief was muted, unnatural. They said my story shifted. First he was late at work, then he was with her. Then maybe with no one at all. Their questions sliced me open. But worse were the doubts creeping into my own mind. Had I said something I shouldn't? Had I revealed too much anger, too much resentment? In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Hollow eyes, trembling hands, a woman who looked guilty even when she wasn't. Or was I? The thought gnawed at me late at night. What if I had lost control? What if rage had taken me further than I remembered? I told myself no. I told myself I could never. But when I closed my eyes, all I saw was the bruise of his grip, the flash of anger in his face, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding like fists against the walls. And suddenly, I understood why they saw me as the suspect. Because part of me was starting to wonder too. The courtroom felt less like a place of justice and more like a stage. Every eye turned toward me as I entered, whispers trailing in my wake like smoke. I wasn't a wife anymore. I was a spectacle. A villain in their story. The prosecution painted, with broad, brutal strokes. They called me cold, unfeeling. They described bruises on my arms as evidence of a fight, blood in the kitchen as the mark of violence. Every fragment of my marriage was pulled apart, reassembled into a weapon aimed at me. Mrs. Carver delayed calling the police. The prosecutor boomed. She admits her marriage was crumbling. She admits she suspected an affair, motive, opportunity, and a pattern of anger. What more is needed? I wanted to scream that none of it was true. Instead, I sat still, knuckles white against the defense table, while the jury drank in his words. They called witnesses, neighbors who spoke of raised voices, of nights when arguments echoed through the walls. My own friends, hesitant but firm, admitted I had confided in them about his lies. Each confession twisted, reshaped into proof of rage. And then came the darkest part, my past. They unearthed it like buried bones. A fight years ago when I'd smashed a glass against the wall during an argument. A diary entry where I had written, "Sometimes I hate him more than I love him." The prosecutor held it high, voice sharp as he read it aloud. Is this the voice of a devoted wife or a woman teetering on the edge of violence? My throat tightened. I wanted to tell them the truth. That diary entries were private thoughts, not confessions. That anger didn't mean murder. That love, twisted as it had become, still bound me to him in ways they couldn't understand. When it was finally my turn to speak, I rose on shaking legs. My voice cracked, but I forced the words out. I didn't kill him. Yes, we fought. Yes, he betrayed me, but I loved him. More than I should have. More than he deserved. The room buzzed, half pity, half doubt. I saw the jurors exchange looks. Unreadable, while the judge called for order. But I knew the truth. In this theater, innocence wasn't enough. They didn't want my grief, they wanted a villain. And I was wearing the costume too well. By the time I left the courthouse that day, the world had already decided who I was. Cameras flashed like gunfire, reporters shouting my name as though it belonged to a monster. Black Widow, one headline read the next morning. Jealous wife turned killer, screamed another. My face was plastered across every channel, every screen, eyes hollow, mouth tight, painted as cold, calculating, guilty. They didn't care about the bruises he left on me, the lies he spun, the years of silence that corroded our love. None of that mattered. The story was simpler if I was the villain. A wife scorned, a wife who snapped, a wife who killed. I stopped answering calls. Friends who once stood by me grew quiet, their support swallowed by doubt. Even family wavered, their voices soft and strained when they promised they believed me. But I could hear it. The hesitation, the unease. The detective never said it outright, but his eyes carried the same verdict as the headlines. To him, to them, I wasn't a grieving widow. I was a suspect who hadn't yet confessed. At night, I couldn't escape the noise. The news anchors dissected my every gesture, my lack of tears, my calm answers, the tremor in my voice. To them, these weren't signs of shock, but signs of guilt. I began to wonder if they were right, if maybe silence had made me complicit, if maybe my anger had wished him gone enough times that the universe finally listened. The isolation hollowed me out. I sat in my cell-like room, blinds drawn, clutching myself as if I might disappear altogether. The grief I couldn't show in public tore me apart in private. Rage bled into despair until I no longer knew the difference. But the cruelest part was the silence left behind. For years, my marriage had been a battlefield hidden behind closed doors. Now it was a public trial, yet his voice was the only one missing. And in that absence, the nation filled the void with its own story, one where I was the murderer, and he was the victim. I thought I had lost everything the day they pulled his body from the river, but I was wrong. The world was taking the rest. I thought the trial had already stripped me bare, left nothing else for them to take. But truth has a way of crawling out from the shadows when you least expect it. It began with a rumor, whispers in the courthouse halls that the lover had cracked. I dismissed it at first, another cruel twist of gossip. But then, on the fourth day, she took the stand again, and this time her polished mask faltered. Her hands shook as she adjusted the microphone. She avoided my eyes, avoided the detective's gaze, even as the prosecutor pressed her. "Tell us again," he said. "About the night Mr. Carver disappeared." Her lips parted, then closed. She swallowed hard, and then, like glass splintering under pressure, the truth slipped out. We staged it," she whispered. The courtroom erupted. My stomach dropped. She went on, voice trembling, words spilling too fast. She admitted they'd met that night, that an argument had spiraled into violence, me screaming at him grabbing my arm. The chaos of a struggle neither of us had meant to ignite. She had arrived later, she claimed, finding him injured, panicked, desperate. Together they had tried to cover it, to move his body toward the river, to make it look like something else. It wasn't supposed to happen, she sobbed. He was supposed to choose. He promised he would choose me. But it got out of control. Her confession split the courtroom in half. The prosecution's case wavered. The defense seized the moment, and the jury sat wide-eyed, suddenly uncertain of everything they thought they knew. I sat frozen, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Her words weren't perfect truth. They twisted blame, blurred timelines. But buried within was something undeniable. My husband hadn't simply vanished into betrayal. He had died in the middle of our tangled mess. His lies, her obsession. My fury. Justice no longer felt like the goal. What justice could there be when love had already been ground into ashes? The judge called for order, but the room remained thick with shock. The lover collapsed into tears, guards steadying her as she was led away. The cameras caught every second, feeding it to a nation starving for answers. And me? I was left with the weight of it all. Not guilty, not innocent, just broken. Because the truth didn't set me free. It only reminded me that love, when poisoned, destroys everything in its reach. Prison is nothing like I imagined. It isn't the bars or the cold walls that break you. It's the silence. Hours stretch into days, days into months, and in the stillness you hear only your own thoughts, louder than any judge's verdict. I wake before dawn, the thin mattress pressing into my bones, and for a moment I forget where I am. Then the clanging doors remind me, freedom isn't mine anymore. Neither is dignity, neither is love. They call me a murderer. Some days I almost believe them. Other days, I replay the chaos in my mind, reminding myself that I didn't plan it, that I never wanted him dead. But wanting and doing blur together in memory. Rage makes everything slippery. Love does too. I think of the woman, the lover, whose confession tore the courtroom apart. She sits in another prison now, her face still perfect in the news reports, though her story is shattered. Some people pity her, others pity me. Most pity no one at all, they just watch, hungry for scandal. But pity doesn't keep you warm at night. It doesn't undo a lifetime of betrayal. When I close my eyes, I see him, not the body in the river, not the man with lies in his mouth, but the boy he used to be, the one who made me laugh when the world felt heavy. That boy is gone, drowned long before the water ever touched him. And maybe I drowned too, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but anger. I don't ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness feels like a luxury meant for better people, cleaner people. I don't deserve it and I don't need it. What I want, what I cling to is understanding. Because marriages don't die in one night. They rot slowly, quietly, behind closed doors. A cruel word here, a broken promise there. Lies dressed as love, silence thick enough to strangle. By the time anyone notices, the foundation has already crumbled. That's what happened to us. We weren't a tragedy waiting to happen. We were already a tragedy, long before blood stained the kitchen floor, long before the river carried him away. The nation may remember me as a villain, as the woman who killed her husband out of rage. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're wrong. What remains certain is this. Love cost me everything. Love, twisted with betrayal, left me hollow. Sometimes, late at night. I wonder what I would say to him if I had one more chance. Not "I'm sorry," not "I forgive you." Just this: we destroyed each other, and we were both too proud to stop. Now, all that remains of me is this story, raw, jagged, unfinished. A warning, perhaps, or maybe just an echo. Because in the end there are no winners, only what's left behind.